You're listening to The Fourfold Disciple, a podcast from Emmett Ministries devoted to turning disciples into disciplers through theology, apologetics, and cultural engagement.
Welcome to part 3 of our Q&A where we're answering your questions. Laken is still here with me, asking questions, giving some insight on how to think through these questions that have been asked to us from a biblical perspective. And so, Laken, thanks for continuing to do this. And so let's dive right into these next questions that we have here.
All right, let's do it. So our next question is, what is the best way for someone to practice their faith at home day to day?
Yeah, this question is very similar to one of the ones we had where it was talking about just like rhythms and those types of things.
Yeah.
And so I think that the best way to begin this practice is by starting with prayer and starting with the Word. And not just the simple little prayer, before your feet hit the ground, Lord, consecrating this day to you, help me to live for you. But really saying, you know what, before everybody else gets up, before I get going on things, I'm going to start by going to the Word, and I'm going to start by seeking the Lord. We're both in ministry, and so our jobs are a little bit different when it comes to this, but I still, when I get into the office, one of the first things I try to do is have just some solitude before the Lord, where I'm praying, and then I usually am journaling, and then in the Word. Doesn't always happen, just sometimes the day starts earlier than I'd like it to, and I need to get something done, and then I come back to that, and I think that's okay, being flexible with those rhythms, but developing a rhythm of like my day is going to start with me being before the Lord, and then I think about my own wife in some of these ways and things she does, play worship music throughout the day, and then I think about setting reminders to pray. I think we can look at maybe even how other religions practice in regards to some of this. Muslims pray 5 times a day. Do you? And so like setting rhythms of, okay, at lunch, I'm not just going to pray before I eat, but I'm going to have 10 minutes where I'm really just praying before the Lord and doing that, seeking Him. Yeah. And then developing godly rhythms as you're going about your day. And so I'll stick with my wife, who's a stay-at-home mom. When you're putting baby down for a nap, pray. Baby goes down for the nap, and now I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes praying. Developing those rhythms around the things that we already have going on. And then doing all of life for the glory of God happens because we're intentional, and understanding that in order to practice your faith at home day by day isn't going to happen just by accident. So you're just not going to wake up one day and go through the day and then it's going to be the end and go, wow, I did everything to the glory of God. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because we seek to be intentional. We're proactive.
Yeah. I think a question that's coming to mind maybe with that, to go with that, is how do we fight the urge to be disappointed when our rhythms don't match up?
Yeah, and I think that happens all the time, right? And so I think about, even in my own life, how frustrated I can get when something unexpected happens or my plans change. And I would say, first, remember, God knew before you woke up that your rhythm was going to get messed up today. And 2, just because the rhythm got messed up doesn't mean that God isn't supposed to be worshipped. And so you think about Jesus' ministry, there's many times where it'd be really easy for Jesus to have just let all the distractions, all of the crowds get to him and go, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to do what the crowd wants. But he still sought time to be with God. He sought time to be with the Father. And so I think even when your rhythms get messed up, make sure you're still seeking that out.
Seek first the kingdom.
That's
good. Okay, our next question says, where should someone start in the Bible? Should they start from the beginning, or would you recommend somewhere else?
If you start in Genesis 1, you're going to be Genesis 1 through 3, you're going to go, okay. Genesis 4, you're going to go, all right, I'm still tracking. And then you're going to start getting to some genealogies, and you're going to be like, I'm done. I'm done reading this. And so if you're a new Christian, or maybe you're not a Christian, you're investigating the Christian faith, while Genesis is an amazing place to start, I think it unfolds the beginning of the gospel story. Genesis 3:15, we see the proto-evangelion, the first gospel, the promise that there will be someone who will crush the serpent. and that'll be Jesus. But I don't think it's the place I would necessarily start with someone.
Okay.
If I were to start reading the Bible, I think starting with a gospel is a really great way. The Gospel of Mark is shorter than the others, 16 chapters, usually bite-sized chapters. Everything's compressed into those chapters, and so you get all of Jesus' life, all of his ministry in that. And so I think that's a great place to start. I personally love the Gospel of John, but if someone's new to the Christian faith, the Gospel of John might not be the place to go. John's writing for a specific audience to make the argument that when Jesus was performing these signs, because he records them as signs, not miracles, he's identifying something. He's identifying that he's God.
Okay.
And so John's a really good gospel to go through, depending on what you're wanting in regards to, like, I need to understand what the Christian faith believes about Jesus being God. Start with John. If you're just wanting an intro to the Christian faith, an intro to really loving the Bible, start with Mark. And then I would say from there go to Mark, and then probably Ephesians or Galatians, and then the book of Hebrews. And so I have three Bible books that I'm just like, if I'm on a desert island, I'm taking these three. I'm taking Genesis, I'm taking the Gospel of John, and I'm taking the book of Hebrews. I love the book of Romans. It's probably my favorite book, but it's not the one I'm taking.
Okay, interesting.
And so those three are, I think, the fundamentals of what Christians believe about the world, the God who's created it, and where we are going, and how we can get there. So
That's really great. Okay, that's good. So maybe start with the book of Mark.
yeah.
So from there, our question is, how do I not treat my faith and spiritual disciplines like something to check off my to-do list?
Yeah, that's a really hard question, because it's so easy to do that, to get into this rhythm of like, oh, I'm done with that, and you write it off.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing I would say, maybe take a break from checklists, and at least having that on your checklist of things to do. And then the second thing I would say would be maybe begin to really dive into why you feel like it has to be a checklist item. And I think a lot of that has to come with the fact that I think we think, well, the Christian life ends at 40. Or this is only the next 5 years, and when you treat it like a checklist, what you'll find is that you'll probably get burnt out on some things, and that you need to understand the Christian life is more than just a checklist. It's more than just a sprint that ends tomorrow, but that it is a marathon. And whether you die tomorrow, Laken, or you die 50 years from now, or 60 years from now, or maybe even 70 years from now, that doesn't change the fact that as a Christian, you're called to pursue the Lord in His Word. You're called to pursue the Lord in prayer. I've sat down with some older saints, and I've thought this before. I'm like, why do you still read the Bible? And I'm reminded of the fact that the reason they still read the Bible is because we serve a timeless God, and He has a timeless Word that is always speaking truth to us.
Yeah.
And so when we remember that, it becomes way more than just a checklist.
Yeah, you find the pleasure and the delight in God, and you realize that you're also friend and daughter or son, not just servant.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, next up we have, should I tithe as a college student?
Yeah, this is a funny question, because there's probably some different perspectives on it of like, you don't have any money, so you should tithe with your time. And it's very similar to probably how we would say how American culture is viewed, maybe even fasting. Well, maybe you should just fast from social media.
Yeah.
And I would say both, yes, you should tithe with your time and you should fast from social media.
Sure.
But when the Bible is talking about tithing, when the Bible is talking about fasting, it's talking about a specific thing. So with fasting, it's talking about food. You would fast from food. That's a specific thing. And with tithing, it is talking about money, financially. But what we see in the New Testament in particular, and maybe we'll do a deeper dive into tithing, I think there's lots of misconceptions around that.
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
it comes to tithing, Christians are called to give cheerfully. We see the widow in Jesus's teachings and the parable of the widow and the widow's mite. She didn't have anything, and she still gave. She gave cheerfully. And so understand why we're called to give, understand what we're giving for, particularly when it comes to tithing. And you should want to tithe. It's not that tithing is simply to make sure the lights stay on in the church building, but you're tithing because you want to advance the kingdom of God. You're You're tithing because it's worship. And I think that there's been a major disconnect for us in the American church with the rise of mega churches and the rise of the prosperity gospel. It says you should give because you're going to get.
Yeah.
Rather, we should say we want to give because we can.
Yeah.
And we serve a God who has called us to. And as individuals who are working and laboring based off of people's willingness to give, I can say that I take very seriously how I view my own money and my own finances, because my life is dependent in many ways financially upon the provision of others.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a part of that, and I'm not saying give so I can have a bigger salary. I'm saying you should want to tithe for the sake of providing.
Yeah.
And because your tithing has a direct correlation to the ability of me using the giftings that I have, of you using the giftings that you have for the advancement of the kingdom of God. Jeff Knight, founder of Intimate Ministries, is always saying, I give because it's not mine in the first place.
Yeah.
And he just models that so well. For me personally, when I was in college and even now, of just someone who we should be giving. It's not ours anyway. And so we want to give cheerfully. And so I'm not going to throw a percentage out at you. I'm not going to say you need to be giving this much. But I'm going to be saying, like, it's a part of worship. And I would say whether it's $1 or $100 or whatever amount that you decide to tithe, I hope that you see it as worshipful.
Yeah.
And that you should not tithe if you don't find it worshipful or cheerful, and if you're doing it out of responsibility, but you should do it to worship God more and advance the kingdom. We want to advance the kingdom.
Yeah.
And the world we live in, part of that is through finances.
Yeah, and I think looking at it as how can I use the resources God has given me to take his gospel where he wants to take it.
Yeah.
So.
And tithing, this is probably helpful to say as well, tithing doesn't necessarily always have to be within the local church body. We're talking, tithing is for the sake of worshiping God and advancing the kingdom of heaven. And so that comes through supporting missionaries. It comes through supporting other local ministries. And so we want to be a part of that. And so tithing is a way for us to be a part of what God is doing. And sometimes, you're on the front lines as a campus outreach staff person. And so, some people don't have the ability to do that, but they do have the ability to do that through giving.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, a really important thing for us to see.
Absolutely. It's necessary. Okay, next question says, how do I not compare my ministry to another person's?
Yeah, this is a good question, because I think so many of us struggle with just comparison in general. How do I not compare my life to your life on social media, all those things? And I think I would say, remember your gifting. Remember what you're gifted with. So our worship leader here, Alan, it'd be really weird if I was just like, man, I can't believe Alan has such a good music ministry, because I cannot sing. It would be a detriment to our church if I decided to start leading the worship ministry. And so remember your gifting. We're not all arms, we're not all feet, we're not all eyes, we're not all mouth. And so you would never look at your tongue and say, I can't believe this didn't help me write this paper. Well, it's not supposed to. It's not what the purpose of a tongue is. Or if your eyeball, you were upset because it didn't help you smell. That your eyeball isn't supposed to do that. And so we need to remember what we're gifted with. And then we also need to remember to rejoice with those who are rejoicing. That you should look at the ministry of someone else and how God is using them and their giftings, and you should rejoice in that. Aaron was not upset that Moses led the people out, and Moses wasn't upset that Aaron was the one who spoke, and we have to remember that.
Yeah, that's good. I did this, we had a staff training last winter, and the phrase was there that I don't need to be you, but I need you. That idea of we both bring skills that God has given us, and I don't need to be you and you don't need to be me, but we need each other to do ministry.
That's so true.
That's good. All right, our next question says, what are spiritual gifts and how do I find out what mine are?
I was thinking about this from a couple of different ways as we were just looking through these. And so it'd be very easy to jump into the sign gifts, as seen in Paul's letter to the Corinthians. But I don't want to do that. Maybe that's for another conversation. But I think we're talking about just giftings from the Spirit. As Christians, we have giftings, and it's important to ask, what are mine? And so I think the first thing I would do is I would say I would go to Romans 12, 7 through 8. That's one of the lists where Paul lays out some of the giftings from leadership to teaching to exhorting others to giving to mercy, all of those things. And so I would say go to that passage and what immediately do you resonate with? And then I would begin to ask others. Hey, I think I have this gift of teaching. Hey, I think, just looking at my life and looking at what the text says, I'm really merciful. I would say you're someone who has this gift of mercy and compassion, just knowing you personally, seeing how you interact, seeing how you think about things from a different way than I do. Gifts of discernment. There are people in my life who just have a gift of discernment. And so asking others to be able, could you point me in that way? A few years ago, Jeff was teaching through Romans, and we came to this, and he had us write out the giftings in Romans 12, and so maybe it's something for you to do. And then he had us write out a pie chart of how we think those things appear in our lives, the top three. That's anyway. And that was really helpful. He also had us to do it for him because he wanted to know, what do you guys think my spiritual gifting is? And so I think that's an easy way to do that. And then the last thing I would say is ask God. Ask the Lord to reveal you what your giftings are. Especially if you're a young believer and you're like, I want to serve, I want to use my giftings from God. What are they? And so ask Him. And so do you have any advice for someone who's questioning those things?
Yeah, I think that piece of asking others in your life, because often one will either be prideful or self-deprecating, and if I think I have the gift of wisdom or teaching even, I can be quick to shut that down. So asking others in your life and being willing to accept that if they say, I see this in you, and learn, okay, how do I not be prideful, but how do I use this to the glory of God is really good.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to flip the script. I'm going to ask you this question because you're on campus. You're seeking to specifically do evangelistic and discipleship ministry on campus. And the question is, how do I start an evangelistic conversation? It can be very fearful, can be full of trepidation to have a gospel conversation. So how do we do this?
Well, I would say so much of, which I have kind of keyed into this some, is that campus outreach is a very relational ministry, and I think that if we look at even Jesus's ministry, it's very relational. It's seeing the personhood behind, it's not just a body that you're trying to meet with and just tell them something that you want. So I think beginning with questions of, do you have a faith background, or asking them even questions like, what do you think about the world? Like, what do you, just get to know the bigger picture, because the gospel can be weaved into anything. The gospel can be weaved into family things. I've met with students and they talk about how they don't have certain family members in their life, and it's like, how does that make you feel, or what does that make you feel about God, maybe, if you believe in Him? And I think those are super easy to weave it in naturally, rather than feeling like you have to shoot straight all the time. I think is really helpful.
And so I will say this about shooting straight. And so I would say that it's really helpful if you're doing just contact evangelism. Like,
for sure.
This is maybe the only time you're ever going to talk to this person unless they show up to church the next week, is saying, hey, my name is Christian. I'm specifically out here. I just want to tell people about Jesus. Do you have a moment? I could tell you what He's done in my life. I think that's an easy way to start.
Know your environment, for sure.
Know your environment. When you're doing those relational things, develop relationships, be genuine. You should not hide the fact that you're a Christian.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the things that we often see in evangelism is people are like, well, I'll befriend them, and then a year from now I'll ask them to go to church, and they'll be like, oh, you're a Christian? And what you might find out is that they're a Christian too, and they also hadn't had a gospel conversation, and we don't want to do that either. And so let's answer one more question, and then we'll break for part 4 to try to keep these a little bit short.
So our last question is, what encouragement would you have for the person who can't seem to stop watching pornography, and are there any best practices to stop?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing I would say is that you should seek help, that you cannot fight this on your own. Just keeping it hidden and hiding is never going to lead to much success. And so confess that sin to someone who can help you, who is maybe discipling you, get accountability for it in that way. And then understand that there are certain things that you can do just naturally that can block some of this stuff, whether that's using something like Covenant Eyes or using another resource. Apple does a good job with their parental restrictions, setting those up, are helpful ways, but it's also important to know that just removing access to something isn't always going to resolve the issue, because you still have a desire there. And so you have to fill that desire with Jesus, right? That has to be Jesus that you're turning to. It's not enough that we would just turn away from something, because if we turn away from sin, usually we'll just turn to another sin to fill that hole. And so we must go to Jesus. Turn to Jesus when you turn from sin. And so this isn't just a guy issue. I think that's important for us to acknowledge. And so maybe you could speak to the girl issue. It's embarrassing, I think, for most people, even though it shouldn't be. But maybe if you have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think for women it's especially hard because it is assumed that women don't struggle with it. So to confess feels like, well, I'm the only one, and now I'm special. My sin is special in some kind of way. So I think for one, just breaking down that stigma of like, it's not special and it's not the worst thing about you, and it doesn't make you worse than someone else who doesn't struggle with that. But I would say one of my best advices with sin in general, but I think specifically sexual sin of this nature, is find someone that you can confess to. And this doesn't have to be just anyone, but I think giving it light. When sin's kept in the dark, it can, one, keep you in shame that Jesus died to free you from, and it grows. When no one knows that it's happening, then you're more likely to just keep doing it because no one knows. So confessing it, while it's uncomfortable, it's embarrassing, it makes you feel awful about yourself, but it also brings light, specifically for the Christian. I was at a conference this summer, the Gospel Coalition for Women, and they said that you don't have to wear the shame anymore. And I think that wearing it is a really good image of like, it's like this jacket, like I can take it off. And Jesus died for me to take off that shame. I don't have to wear it.
That's great. I think that's a really good illustration too. And I would close with maybe this overall on it, is that you just need to remember the gospel. Teach the gospel to yourself every day. You know, in the Pentecostal movement, we hear language like, oh, you need to be baptized with the Holy Spirit. And not to make any more comments about that, but what you really need to be baptized with every single day is the gospel. That you be immersed in what Jesus has done for you, and remembering that he has died for you, that he is enough for you, and that he was raised for you, that you would be a righteous son or daughter of God. And so hopefully this is helpful as we close out part 3 of answering your questions.
Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and follow, and let us know what you want to hear about on the fourfold disciple as you go from disciple to discipler. For more resources on discipleship and to connect with us, visit emmettministry.org.